מן המניין של ממשלת ישראל שדנה אתמול במתיחות בחזית הצפון.
5 במרס, ביום ג' קיבלנו מידע ממקור שנחשב אצלנו והוכיח את עצמו להיות מקור נאמן. וממנו שמענו שיש החלטה בממשלת סוריה לצאת לפעולות צבאיות על מנת לשחרר לעצמה, לפי דבריהם, את השטח שנכבש על ידינו בזמן מלחמת יום הכיפורים. ושהצבא הסורי עומד בכוננות גבוהה מאוד. ביום שלישי בערב, אחרי שבדקו כל מיני סימנים, גם ממקורות נוספים, גם ממה שנעשה בשטח, קראתי לישיבת הממשלה על מנת למסור לממשלה המידע שיש בידינו, והפעולות שצה"ל עומד לנקוט בהן על מנת להיות מוכן לכל דבר. אנחנו גם התקשרנו עם גורמים מדיניים ידידותיים להעמיד אותם על המצב ולבקש מהם לעשות מה שיש ביכולתם על מנת למנוע התפרצות של אש. ב7 במרס, עם גמר ביקור שר החוץ הסובייטי בסוריה, נתפרסמה הודעה משותפת, ובה בין היתר נאמר שהמצב בחזית הזאת עומד לפני התלקחות העלולה לסכן את השלום במזרח התיכון ובעולם, וששני הצדדים הגיעו לידי הסכם שלסוריה יש כל הזכות הלגיטימית להשתמש בכל האמצעים על מנת להחזיר לעצמה את שטחה הכבושה. אלה הם סימנים מדאיגים, וכפי שאמרתי, עשינו שני דברים. ביקשנו גורמים מדיניים לנסות למנוע את חידוש האש, וצה"ל מובן עשה כל מה שנחוץ היה כדי שיהיה מוכן לכל מה שעלול לקרות שם. מה שסוריה עושה זה בניגוד גמור לנכונות ישראלית להיכנס למשא ומתן עם סוריה, להגיע להסכם על הפרדת הכוחות. אנחנו עדיין מקווים שהכל יעבור בשלום. יחד עם זאת, מובן מאליו שצה"ל צריך להיות מוכן, ואני יכול להגיד שהוא נכון לכל דבר שיקרה, אם חלילה יקרה בגבול הצפון.
גברתי ראש הממשלה, אני מודה.
I'm very glad to meet you here in Israel and here in the city. I want to take this as a sign that your friends and parents who have been here last year must have been very kind to me. Otherwise, I suppose you wouldn't have come back. So, may I then proceed in the same way, same pattern that we usually follow meeting groups of this kind. I think since you're in Israel, and you can see for yourself and meet people, it would be not very wise and not very kind to you to make a speech. On the other hand, I'm sure that you've had questions before you came here. Maybe some more were added since you are here. And I would appreciate it if you ask any question or make any comment. I only have one condition, that be very frank. Say whatever you wish to say, ask whatever you want to say. And I promise to be frank in my answers and do my best to answer your questions. I may not succeed. And I think if we spend the time that we have in a discussion of this kind, to my mind it is much better to spend this little time than you listening to me.
Dr. Lepperstein, moderate the questions.
We'll have the first question, please.
Rather used to Canadian. Since I've come here and talking with the people that I have, I've grown very pessimistic about the Jerusalem question especially. To me it seems like it's absolutely hopeless. And I can't imagine any solution, long-term or otherwise, between the Arabs and the Israelis without a Jerusalem solution. Is this just my perception? Can you see any hope for it at all in the long term?
First place, one of the luxuries that Israelis cannot afford is to be pessimistic about anything. So that I wouldn't share your feelings about pessimism as to the solution of the question of Jerusalem or the solution of any question between the Arab countries and Israel. Any solution is very difficult. As to Israel, I'm convinced that when in 1947 the United Nations decided on an internationalized Jerusalem, they thought that was the ideal solution. And we accepted it, not because we thought it was ideal, but we accepted it. And then Jerusalem was divided by force by the Jordanian army. In 1967, again we were attacked and we united the two parts of Jerusalem. Now the question is, why is not a solution that says that Jerusalem is part of Israel and the capital of Israel, with full recognition that the Christian religion and the Muslim religion have holy places in Jerusalem, East Jerusalem, which naturally they should be allowed to administer and be in full control of the holy places. This is something that Israel was prepared from the very beginning, and that everybody can have free access to any holy place that is in their interest. We have no ambition nor desire to control any holy places of any religion, and that should be the solution, as President Senghor of Senegal phrased it. The Christians have Rome, the Muslims have Mecca, and Jerusalem, the Jews have Jerusalem, except that we will treat the Muslims and Christians better than we were treated for 19 years when we were not allowed to go into East Jerusalem and to visit any of our holy places. And old synagogues were destroyed. The Wailing Wall could not be destroyed, but we couldn't even wail at it. We were not allowed to go there. But we, from immediately after the Six-Day War, said both to Christians in the Vatican and said to Muslims, it's your protection and your administration. As a matter of fact, de facto, this is the situation at the present time. We don't interfere in the administration of any of the holy places that do not belong to us. This is the only, to my mind, I'm not exactly objective about these matters, but I think this is the just solution and a solution that doesn't take anything away from anybody.
May we have the next question?
Even being optimistic about your national problems, actually, your domestic problems, though, I think that's right to say that's. I've heard it said that the unionism was not sufficient to combine the citizens of Israel without an external threat. Moving people together. And I wonder if you would comment on this in a time when the external problems are solved.
Well, I think that we disproved this theory because good friends always used to say to us, all right, now your neighbors are in war with you and therefore you are together. What will happen to you when you're at peace? Well, we've disproved this theory because we have a little bit of internal trouble even while we're still at war with our neighbors. So, I think that we are more or less a normal people, like others. We're a democratic society. And in a democratic society, you don't want unanimity, and even if you want it, you can't get it. And I don't think any one of us, if he had to choose a society where there is no inner conflict, which means a totalitarian regime, or a democratic regime with everything that goes with it, good and bad. I have no doubt that all of us would choose the second. And we're a democratic society with political parties, too many political parties, but at any rate, here they are. And with an electoral system which makes it rather easy for splinter parties to get in. All they need is 1% of the number of votes cast in an election and they can get in. So we always have in Parliament somewhere between 8 and 10 parties represented. They're not all of them really parties, but they can be a small group and they get their 1% and they can come in. And at present, we've had a bit of a difficult period after the War of October, because we were taken by surprise. We misjudged the intelligence that was at our disposal. I think we misjudged that because of for once, we were judging our neighbors according to our mentality. And we said, well, they can't believe that they're going to win this war. And therefore, why should they go to war? But they think differently. I don't think they had hopes of really winning. But at any rate, they were prepared to go to fight us again, even if they lose. And the results are, for instance, that Sadat and the Egyptian people know that they lost. It's no secret. And yet, Sadat thinks that he's a hero and he's very much in control of Egypt because he tried at any rate. At any rate, it was the first 2 days were very, very difficult days for us. You can imagine that how outnumbered we are, even when we are prepared, even if we don't make a mistake, in men, but in everything, planes and tanks and guns and everything that goes with it. This war was planned for the last 3 years by the Egyptians and Syrians, actually by the Russians. And the Russians supplied Syria and Egypt with everything that they wanted or needed. And we are as we are. We're 3 million and better supplied now than our army ever was. and it is due primarily to you people, to the United States, because I think the United States realizes that Israel has a right and should exist free and independent, and it can exist only if it is strong enough to fight off an attack. I don't think the United States has any doubt that we didn't start any war in the past, nor will we in the future. All we want is to live, and to live in peace if possible. So after 2 days, we called up our reserves. If we are dependent entirely upon reserves, we can't afford a large standing army. So we have a small standing army and have a system of calling up reserves rapidly. But when we did that, then we came out all right. But we paid a heavy price for the surprise. And people were shocked. And there's a lot of sorrow in the country because of the smallness of our population. It becomes almost a tragedy of a family. We know each other. We know whose son fell. Either they went to school together with our children or with our grandchildren, or they were in the same youth movement, or they fought in the war of liberation together, and these are the children now. This is the third generation that has gone to war. It's my generation, then our sons and daughters, and now it's our grandchildren. I've said to American friends during the war in Vietnam, when the family was hurt in Los Angeles, it was a tragedy for the family and the immediate circle of friends. But nobody was affected in New York or in Texas or in Ohio or anywhere else. Here we're too small. Any family practically that has been struck, it's almost like one family. Or for instance, if you have, suppose you know what a kibbutz is. Well, if in a kibbutz 11 sons don't come back from the battlefield, this is really one family that lost 11 sons, or 8 or 10, and there have been such cases. So one shouldn't be surprised that there's a lot of sorrow in the country. Maybe a little bit also of being ashamed that we were caught in surprise. And naturally, in a situation of that kind, you blame government, maybe rightly so. So we've had a bit of unhappy period. I'm convinced we'll get out of it. Absolutely convinced. Generally, I used to say to my friends that if you don't believe that we can be together and united in peace, I'm anxious to see the day when this is the challenge with which Israel will be faced. We're at peace with our neighbors, nothing to worry about. Now let's see how you conduct yourselves. I think we'll be all right. But I admit that the people were shaken up a bit, maybe a lot, and I think the time will pass and we'll get out of it. We still have challenges to meet.
The next question, please. George.
George Yeager, Department of State. Madam Prime Minister, given the domestic political situation you alluded to and the closeness of the parliamentary situation in Israel at this point, will there be, in the next 6 or 8 months, enough strength to make the tough decisions which will be necessary to keep up momentum on the negotiations on the various fronts?
The government that I'm heading at present, because we have resigned, is technically, according to our laws, is called a government that has resigned. But by law, a government in the status that this government is in has full authority to conduct all matters internal and external. As a matter of fact, we signed the agreement of separation of forces with Egypt when we were just before, immediately after election, and the new government was not yet elected by Parliament. So that there can be no, there cannot be a situation where there's no government. A government is in power, in full power, entrusted to do everything as long as it has the majority in Parliament. And if it hasn't a majority, it goes on anyhow. It cannot be voted against. This is the position of this government now. And government conducts the affairs as though it was a newly elected government. So when Dr. Kissinger comes here in a week or so, or 10 days or so, we will negotiate with Dr. Kissinger, and government will conduct itself as though there was no problem whatsoever. And we will be within the law. In addition to that, we have a majority in Parliament. If we have to go to Parliament to ask for a vote, we have a majority.
Theory of faculty. We read that a new generation is coming into power in Israel. Wondering if you could comment on how different this new generation is likely to be, your generation, I call it that. What impact their presence is likely to have on policy in Israel during ahead.
Well, last night, the party that I belong to, and is the largest party in Parliament, and has always been since the invasion of the state, and the majority in government, we always had to have a coalition government. We were always a large majority in the government. My party voted for the candidate for the next, be Prime Minister for the first time, an Israeli-born young man. Maybe some of you knew him. He spent several years in Washington as our ambassador, Mr. Rabin, who was the chief of staff during the Six-Day War. This is something new. Until now, all of us that were prime ministers came from outside of the country. And this is the first young man who was born in this country. His father, by the way, it may interest you, came from Russia to the United States, volunteered into the Jewish Legion during the First World War, came here to fight and remained here. And Yitzhak Rabin has been born here, went through the entire pattern of young people of his age in the self-defense movement, in the struggle we had with the British, in the War of Liberation, and then became Chief of Staff and led the Army successfully in '67, and ambassador to a little country like the United States, and did it very well, conducted himself with dignity and with a lot of wisdom, and with success wherever he was. So this is one thing that is new. And I think my generation, those that, I'm not exactly a newcomer, I've been here now 53 years, but I wasn't born here. This I think will be the pattern. Now the turn has come for Israeli-born people to take over, and the age group to take over. Now there was 52. I'm sure they are much more capable than we are. We were more modern, a new way of thinking, more efficient, maybe a little bit, maybe even much, they are freer maybe than we are, or my generation, of experience, of personal experience. All of those that were in government before were people, most of them at any rate, were people that came mainly from Eastern Europe. And maybe you have read that we have complexes. We have long historical complexes of Sada and so on. But many of us, and most of us, have personal complexes of pogroms in Russia, of being under Tsarist regime, of some that have come from the Holocaust in Germany or in other Nazi-occupied countries in Europe. This generation, Mr. Robin's generation, had a life of struggle and fighting, but they were never in a position that we were, where we couldn't defend ourselves. That we were always faced with brutal power against us, and we were few, with no hope of fighting back. For instance, during the ghettos in Warsaw and in other countries of Eastern Europe and Central Europe, during the Nazi regime, there were uprisings in the ghetto of young Jewish men and women. But these were not uprisings with any hope to win it. They couldn't, with whatever they had, they couldn't fight the German tanks. It was rather a choice: do we die lying down, or do we die trying to fight back? That they will die, that was certain. There's no chance for life. Whereas this generation that is coming up now is a generation that has had to fight a lot, too much. But always with the feeling that they fight to win, and they fight to live, and that they're not doomed to death no matter what they do. So it's a new generation with a new outlook. I'm sure they'll do better than we have. They'll do it differently, but they'll do better.
Lieutenant Colonel Nelson, Air Force. Madam Prime Minister, following on your question or your comments just a little bit, last evening I had a very informative evening. I had an opportunity to talk with several young people that were in the age group of, say, 20 to 30. And we discussed much of the type of thing that we were talking to, but also the perception of the Arab spirit that seemed to be projected. Some of the people I talked to were military people, and some were civilian. But underlying all of this was a general feeling that the Arab force that we generated is a new force that you have to face with. It was very worrisome for them. They all had different ideas, but basically very great concern for the strength of the Arab. Can you comment on that?
Well, I think we should be concerned. First is the numbers. The second place, they had no problems until now. Now Sadat says that he has problems and has had problems for some time in getting ammunition and the military equipment from Russia. He didn't get everything that he wanted, but he got a lot. And Syria, I think, is still getting everything that Assad wants. To have the Soviet Russia as a supplier and the vested interest in the Arab countries, that's a lot. And there's no doubt there's a young generation growing up also in Egypt, and they're being trained better than those were in 1948 when they fought us. But we mustn't be, our confidence in ourselves must never lead us to a situation where we say, well, that doesn't matter, no matter how many they are. There are 100 million and we're 3 million, but that doesn't matter. We should always remember and take into consideration the strength and the power of our neighbors. But on the other hand, the motivation is such, and what is the fighting about? We don't go out in order to conquer something, to conquer people or to conquer territory, to annex territory. Never. the motivation in a war, when we are attacked, is the life of the people in the country. And therefore, our army, I think still, as has been proven in '67, I hope we won't have any more wars, but I'm afraid that's only a pious hope. But I'm convinced that we will never be caught by surprise as we were in October. And then our people, knowing what they're fighting for, until now at any rate, have proved that they have the upper hand with all the disadvantages that we have. And our Army, Air Force, and others are still very good. They have to be. Which does not mean that we're looking for more victories. And I'm glad that the young people speak as they speak about the Arab armies and the Arab people, because we should always know that there is great danger, and therefore we have to do better. So if there should be another war, after all, the Arab people can't go on fighting forever either, because they have an advantage which I do not envy. They do not take their losses like we do. They're not so worried and anxious about prisoners of war as we are. The last war, for instance, with the exchange of prisoners between us and Egypt, we had 242 or 243 men come home. We sent 8,000 back to Egypt.
מהחוף המערבי רוצים להקליט אותך. דבר, תיסע לאור לאומה.
That these arms are against Israel. I always say the Russians lack idealism to such an extent that they supply deadly arms to the Arabs against Israel without even an ideal of destroying Israel. They haven't decided to arm Egypt and Iraq and Syria and all the other neighbors because they have an ideology that Israel must go out of existence. No, not even that. But it's a question of weighing if there were 100 million Jews in the area in 20 independent countries and a little tiny Arab country of 3 million, they would do the same thing against the Arabs, what they're doing against us. I don't know whether you gentlemen agree. My opinion about the Soviet Russia and the communist ideology is such that there are no morals and there are no ideals. If this is good for us, it's right and it's just, and we go ahead, and if it hurts somebody in the way, it doesn't matter. So when you have a supplier of that kind, I wouldn't change. If I could choose between the United States and Russia, I'd still choose the United States, although we don't always get everything we want. But they have Russia, a ruthless supplier. They've been trained in Russia and being trained in Russia. And I know that is immediately when the war broke out in October, there was an airlift to Syria and to Egypt, and the boats coming in and bringing in constant supply of arms. So we know their strength, we know their possibility of becoming strong, and yet we're not afraid. We don't like wars. But if there should be, I think we will again conduct ourselves like in the past.
Carpenter Army, would you give us your views on the commission of inquiry? Do you believe that it adequately developed facts in satisfactory conclusions?
This is a commission according to law. As government, at a time when a problem arises which is of general interest to the public, this kind of a commission is set up. Government determines only the terms of reference, and then the President of the High Court elects the panel, or appoints the panel. Its conclusions or suggestions can either be accepted by government or rejected. But naturally, we accept them. And so far, they have only come up with a partial report. It was very strict against our Chief of Staff, who, by the way, is a wonderful person, but he had to take the blame according to the findings of this commission, and a few more high officers in the Army, a head of intelligence, and 2 or 3 of his colleagues in the military intelligence. And what they have to investigate now is, was the Army generally prepared for war? In as far as the strategic philosophy, let me say it this way, for war, the concepts, training, supplies, and so on. I'm afraid that the rate that they're going, the pace that they're going, will probably be several months. They're working very, very thoroughly. And whenever they suggest, I think government will accept, although it has legal right not to accept it. It would be quite unnatural if government would not accept. There are 2 judges on this commission, 2 men who were chiefs of staff, and the state controller. So a commission of a level of that kind, I don't know any government that would dare not accept whatever they say.
Colonel Lyson, I'd like to quote, or just ask one question to follow on to Mr. Ray's question. Yesterday in the Labor Party, when they selected Mr. Rabin, Mr. Perez is pretty close behind him, Perez. Do you see the kind of cooperation that showed in Jerusalem Post this morning, for example, between Mr. Rabin and Mr. Perez to form a new government?
I'm convinced that they will cooperate very, very well. By the way, this is the first time that my party has to choose between 2 candidates. And I must say they conducted their campaign in a very modern way. I think they both learned a lot from America. For instance, Mr. Perez said there are 605, I think, members on this committee, executive committee of the party. He said, I did something very simple. I took the list of members, I looked up their telephone numbers, and kept calling everyone. And he did it with a lot of charm, and knew exactly what spot to touch on when he spoke to each one, and came out very, very well. So, and these 2 men are the same generation, and they went through everything together, although Paris is not Israeli born. I think he came here as a child. but spent practically his entire life here. He was, for quite a few years, Director General of the Ministry of Defense. He is charming, sufficient, and I have no doubt that the two will work together. There are at least 2 or 3 more young people in the cabinet of almost that same generation. And it'll be a new era in Israel. There's no question of it. But it's all for the good. Afterwards, grandmothers should take care of their grandchildren.
Prime Minister, I'm Lowell Kilnick from the Department of State. I wanted to ask what you think are the bases for U.S. support of Israel, whether you are apprehensive about the extent of Israeli dependence on U.S. support, and more importantly, whether you are apprehensive about the possible future limits of U.S. support for Israel, particularly considering the new U.S. efforts to establish relationships with Europe.
There is one very important item in our very close relationship with the U.S., which we naturally appreciate greatly, and that is that we know, and the United States government and the United States people know, we have never asked for military personnel, and I don't think we ever will. Not only because we're never sure that if we ask for personnel we would get it, but even if we would, I think that would be the day of, I may put it that way, of losing a bit of our independence. Even if we ask for military personnel from the United States and they come in time and we win the war, we have lost something. So far, in all the wars that we had to fight, it was our people that paid for the victories and for our remaining alive. And we dread the thought that anybody will have to shed blood for us. So that's something that is extremely important to us. I think it is important also to the United States, knowing that they have a client that, I mean, you Americans say it, you do it yourself. And we do it ourselves. My sorrow, we've had to do it several times. But we are still dependent upon the United States, no doubt about that. For military supplies, to a certain degree, dependent upon the Jewish community in the United States for economic aid not for the people and not for military supplies, but for the economic development of the country, for the absorption of new immigrants. That we do not feel that we're doing something that is not dignified when we come to Jews in the United States and Jews all over the world and say to them, look, Jews from Russia or Jews from Iraq and from Libya and from Morocco and from Yemen that have come to us, they're your Jews the same as our Jews. And therefore it is a common concern, and let's do it together. We do our share and you do yours. But we get also economic aid from the United States. We appreciate that very much. But the United States, being what it is, has never expected us to say yes to everything. And there have been moments when we said no. It's not pleasant. It's much easier to say yes than it is to say no, especially to a friend that does so much for one. But I think the United States respects our independence, and we can discuss matters sometimes, maybe with heated discussions, but we always end as friends. Now, we never asked anybody for exclusivity. We've never said to anybody, as our Arab neighbors have always said, you must not be a friend of Israel if you want to be a friend of Egypt or Syria or Iraq. We think this is nonsensical and it's not the way that people should live in the world. So certainly we have nothing against the United States renewing its presence in this area and its friendship now with Egypt and Saudi Arabia and with other Arab countries, hoping and being certain that it will not and should not be at the expense of Israel, at the expense of the friendship between the United States and Israel. But at the same time realizing that Israel is not the only interest that the United States has in this area. Many interests, but one of them, for instance, which was very much felt in the last few months, is the question of energy, the question of oil. We do not have oil in the country. We do not have billions and billions and billions of dollars reserves that we don't know what to do with, and running around in the world and trying to create mischief with our money. All these advantages we do not have. And as I said to some of my good friends in Washington, in the administration, the only thing that we really have is the spirit of the people. And maybe that's why we're so stubborn when we think that something is asked of us that will break that spirit. Once that spirit is broken, we have nothing. No oil, no money, nothing else. It's the spirit of the people that is responsible that we're still here, and we want to go on being here, and we want to be friends with our neighbors. And last but not least, certainly, if there must be a big power interest in this area, there's no question which power we would choose. Whether it should be the Russians, as I said before, I think they are, sure they are, or the United States, there's no question. There's a lot of common that we have with the United States. And the hope, which was always prominent in our way of thinking, that actually, since the Arabs have so many independent countries, and they have such immense territories and resources, we hoped all the time that they would become preoccupied at a certain point with the welfare of their own people instead of having this major interest of destroying us. And if Sadat speaks as he does now, and we keep our fingers crossed and hope that he really means it, then now he wants to do something for his people. He wants to build, modernize the agriculture, he wants to build industry, he wants more education, he wants more health. Well, that's fine. All we asked is that they should begin to care for their own people, not for us. If they really and sincerely are preoccupied with the welfare of their people, then there is very little room left for war. Certainly the presence of the United States in the Arab countries is not a presence that will encourage them for war, but will help them with everything that the United States can in order to build their countries and to raise the standard of living and life of their people, and God knows they need it. So although we may have little difficulties, I once said to one of your ambassadors, a wonderful person, And I complained when I was in the Foreign Office, and complained about something that I thought the United States was doing to us that wasn't as we wanted them to do. So he looked at me and he said, Mrs. Meir, we have recognized the sovereignty of Israel. Is it possible that you should recognize the sovereignty of the United States? I said, well, 50% of this I certainly recognize. So, but I must say the United States never made us feel that we, the United States, and you, little Israel, what are we arguing about? But they argue with us as though we were one of the powers of the world.
Next question. Jim Delaney, State Department. Madam Prime Minister, could you comment as to whether you think the Soviet backing of Syria is negotiable in any way, and what the U.S. might do in terms of its larger relationship with the Soviet Union in order to encourage the Soviet Union to let up Syria?
There's no doubt that Syria is one of the strongholds of the Soviet Union in the area. I think Iraq comes first, Syria close second. Egypt now is slipping, I think, from the point of view of the Soviet Union. And there's no doubt that the Syrians are being encouraged to take a very tough stand on the question of separation of forces. We're not yet speaking about peace, but we want at least the first step, similar to that which was taken between Egypt and us, the separation of forces and no shooting. They're shooting all the time up on the Golan Heights, the Syrian border, although they accepted the ceasefire resolution the same as we did. But that didn't make any difference. Neither did it make difference in Egypt. They asked for ceasefire, they got it, but they kept on shooting until there was a separation of forces. The United Nations does not become excited about that. And we have this situation in the northern border. And the Russians, no doubt, are encouraging them to be tough and to demand things which are impossible if we talk about separation of forces and not yet a peace agreement. In addition to that, the Syrians always were more extreme than, let us say, the Egyptians or the Jordanians. One of your countrymen that went 2 or 3 months ago up to Syria for the first time and spoke to President Assad came then to Jerusalem and said to me, well, of course he wants to destroy Israel. I mean, this is assumed as though this was the most natural thing for anybody to want. Not that this gentleman thought it that way, but I mean, anybody that meets Assad, and he's considered to be moderate, because around him are men that are much more extreme than he is. And we always have to keep this in mind. By the way, if I comment on this, when people say to us, why are we so set on the question of secure borders? And after all, in modern warfare, in the modern world, borders mean nothing. Usually people that say this to us still have borders with their neighbors, which they think are important. They're not at war. We always must keep in mind, even when we come to a point where we sign peace agreements, and people say, look, the real guarantee for peace is having peace with your neighbors, and not borders. There's a lot of truth in that, but who are your neighbors? For instance, there have been wars between Germany and France. I can't imagine that in this world, this era, anybody can envisage a war of Germany attacking France or France attacking Germany. There are treaties, there are peace agreements between countries. In democratic regimes, when a government signs a peace agreement, ratified by its parliament, and a new government is elected, it doesn't throw this peace agreement into the wastepaper basket and goes to war. With us and our neighbors, we always have to keep in mind that supposing we sign an agreement with Assad, and everybody tells us that despite the fact that he wants to destroy us, he's moderate. And all those around him are more extreme. The change in who is president or who is prime minister in our neighboring countries is not exactly according to the pattern of how it is done in the United States or in Israel. They have much more direct methods of how to do it. And we always have to worry about it. Supposing this moderate, nice gentleman, Assad, that only wants to destroy Israel, signs finally a peace agreement with Israel, and the next day, he's out. He's in a better world. What happens? What happens to one of the extreme opponents of his that takes over? He will honor Assad's signature? Nobody would really say yes. As a matter of fact, we had experience after the War of Independence. There were negotiations with King Abdullah, and an agreement initialed between us. And shortly after that, King Abdullah, with his little grandson, King Hussein, went to visit the old city, going to the mosque, and was assassinated. It never entered the mind of anybody in Jordan that took over that Abdullah's initials obligated them to anything. So we always have to keep this in mind too. And with Russian backing and Russian encouragement, I foresee very difficult negotiations with Syria. But people say there's nothing that Dr. Kissinger cannot accomplish. Let's see. At least at any rate, we want to come to some arrangement. I'm sure Dr. Kissinger does. And maybe something will come out of it.
Bob, you're here from acknowledging that it's sometimes difficult and perhaps even unrealistic to separate foreign policy from domestic issues. Could you please tell us what you think are your country's chief domestic issues or problems over the next decade?
See, there's one more difference between us and our neighbors. They can say to themselves, we want war, we want to attack Israel, we want to destroy Israel, everything else can wait. We can't do that. Our society is different. Then we're a country that is absorbing immigrants. We started out in 48 when we were about 650,000, and we're close to 3 million, with an Arab and Druze minority of around 400,000. We've had to absorb these people. 85–90% of those that came to us came from underdeveloped countries, like, for instance, people that came to us from Libya came from caves. People that came from the Atlas Hills of Morocco, I don't know what century they were living. People that came to us from Yemen were 17th century probably. With people that came from Western countries and modern and highly developed countries, some United States and Canada and England, Western Europe and South Africa and so on. The question of absorbing these people, of housing them, of sending them to school. We have a much larger population in our educational institutions now than what was the entire population in 1948. One of the first laws that we passed in Parliament was compulsory free education from the age of 5 to 14. We have now raised it to 16. And now we have 80% of children at the age of 3 and 4 in kindergartens. Why is it so important to us? Because this little one, 2 years or 3 years old, 4 years old, is the may be the one that carries the first Hebrew word into the home. I've had, every one of us in Israel has had the experience of sitting in a room with 20 or 25 people that came from 10 or 12 countries and that speak 7 or 8 languages. And we had to make one people out of all these that had nothing in common with each other except one thing, that we were Jews. But nothing else in common, no language, not the way of living, not the same culture. Everything was different. And we had to forge this into one people and into a cultured people. We never knew illiteracy in this country, the Jewish community, until this mass immigration. Out of the 70,000 Jews that came from Yemen, all men knew how to read because they read the Bible. Not one single woman knew how to read or write. Not one. So, and a good part of the Iraqian Jews that came to us, and Moroccan Jews, and many others. So we have these problems and they were not farmers. They were not engineers, and not doctors, and not good at how were building workers. We had to take these people, teach them how to work, put them through vocational training, send the youngsters to school, house them, put them into agricultural villages, make farmers out of them. This, I think, is probably something that you find very, very few examples in history, if any. We're still at it. For instance, now we have not as many as we would want to have Jews that come out of Russia. But still, since 71, we've had about 30, 32, 33,000 Jews a year that came out of Russia. There are different problems with them. They are literate, but they come from a regime that is entirely different. It takes time before they start looking around, before they say a word. And many of them have said to us, you think we came from one country to another. That isn't true. We came from one world to another. They come with their special problems. And we're happy to have them with their problems. Or Romanian Jews, or Jews of other Eastern European countries that present different problems than those that come from the Muslim countries. And we're not happy that we have not yet done for this population that's coming since 1950 enough. We still have a shortage of housing. Although we have done a lot in bringing up their standard of living, and it's much better than any one of our neighboring countries, that is no source of satisfaction to us. We still are not satisfied with the society because it doesn't meet the ideal that we have of what the society in Israel should be. We've done a lot in industry, and our economy held out beautifully during the war. There's no breakdown in anything, although an immense percentage of our manpower was in the army. But we're not satisfied with all that. We want to do more. These are problems that we have: social problems in the country, development in the country, and so forth.
I believe that we should bring this to a close. As a moderator, I'd like to just ask one short last question. I've always had a certain fascination myself with the politics of General de Gaulle. Now that France is in a certain amount of turmoil, do you see